Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room full of photographs and felt completely invisible? Not because the photos were of strangers, but because they were of you, a younger you, a version of yourself that laughed easily, that carried children on his shoulders, that believed with his whole chest that love, once given freely enough, would always find its way back. I've sat in that room. I sit in it most mornings now. My name is Raymond Sinclair. I'm 89 years old. And somewhere in this world there are 4 children, beautiful children, I'm told, who carry my blood in their veins and have never once heard my name spoken out loud. Not because I died young, not because I disappeared, but because someone decided a long time ago that I wasn't worth remembering. I want to tell you how that happened. Not to ask for your sympathy. I've made peace with most of it. But because I've lived long enough to understand something that took me far too long to learn. And I don't want you to learn it the same way I did. I grew up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, Millbrook, population maybe 2,000 on a busy day. The kind of place where everyone knew your father's name before they knew yours, and where the soil in the backyard smelled like iron and pine needles after it rained. My father worked at the lumber mill. My mother raised 4 children and kept a garden that was the envy of every woman on Culver Street. We weren't rich, but we ate together every night. My mother made sure of that. It didn't matter how tired my father was. Didn't matter if my sister Ruth had been crying all afternoon about something or other. At 6 o'clock, we were at that table, together. I think about that table a lot now. I think about what it meant. Not the table itself, the scratched oak surface, the mismatched chairs, but the intention behind it. The quiet insistence that no matter what happened during the day, this family would look each other in the eye and share something. That was love, I understand now. Not the kind you say, the kind you show up for. I didn't fully appreciate it when I was young. Most of us don't. I met my wife Eleanor in the autumn of 1958. I was 22 years old and working at a small hardware store in town, and she came in looking for paint, a very specific shade of green that she said was the exact color of the shutters on her grandmother's house in Virginia. We didn't have it. She looked at me like I had personally failed her, and I thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. I ordered the paint specially. It took 10 days. I found a reason to call her when it arrived, even though she had not given me her telephone number, and I had to ask 3 people around town before I found it. She laughed when I called. That laugh. Even now, sitting here at 89 years old, I can hear that laugh the way you hear a song from your childhood, sudden, clear, and full of a feeling you can't quite name. We were married in June of 1961. It was the best decision I ever made, and I will go to my grave saying so. We had 2 children, a son, Thomas, born in 1963, a daughter, Patricia, born in 1966. Eleanor and I gave them everything we had. Not everything in the material sense. We were comfortable, not wealthy. But everything in the sense that mattered. Time, attention, presence. I coached Thomas's Little League team for 6 years. I know that sounds ordinary, but I want you to understand what it means to give 6 summers of Saturday mornings to a group of 11-year-old boys who have no idea how to hold a bat. That's love in the form of patience. That's love in the form of showing up even when you're tired, even when your back hurts, even when you'd rather be doing something, anything else. Patricia was quieter. She loved books and music and long walks by herself. I used to drive her to the county library every other Saturday, and we'd sit together in the reading room for 2 hours without saying more than a handful of words. Just her with her books and me with a newspaper. And somehow those were some of the most peaceful hours of my life. I thought I was building something. I believed, the way you believe in the foundation of a house, that all of that time and care and presence would hold. I didn't understand then how easily a foundation can be undermined, not by neglect, not by malice, sometimes just by silence. Eleanor passed away in 2003. I won't dwell on that too long because if I do, I'll lose the thread of what I want to say to you. But I need you to understand what her death meant in the context of everything that came after. Eleanor was the center of this family, not in the way people say it about mothers sometimes, as a kind of polite compliment. I mean it structurally. She was the one who remembered birthdays and made the phone calls and suggested the holiday dinners and kept the threads of connection between all of us intact. When she was gone, I didn't know how to do those things. I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you the truth about who I was. I was a man of my generation. I provided. I protected. I showed up. But the language of emotional connection, the phone calls, the letters, the reaching out just to say I'm thinking of you, that had always been Eleanor's territory, and I was too proud and too lost in my own grief to admit that I needed to learn it. So I retreated into the house, into routine, into the quiet. I told myself the children needed time. I told myself they were grieving too. I told myself that space was a form of respect. What I didn't tell myself, what I couldn't admit, was that I was afraid. Afraid that if I reached out I would cry. Afraid that hearing my son's voice would break something open in me that I wouldn't be able to close again. So I waited. And weeks became months. And months became something longer and harder to measure. It was Thomas who drifted first. He had married a woman named Diane in 1994. I liked Diane. She was direct and practical, and she made my son happy. But after Eleanor died, something shifted in that household. I could feel it in the phone calls that grew shorter, in the Christmas visits that were suddenly complicated by travel and schedules, in the way Diane started answering the phone instead of Thomas, and the way the conversations felt, managed somehow, careful. I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it better now. When you are an older man living alone, grieving quietly, not reaching out, not making effort, you start to become a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known. You don't mean to. It happens slowly. But other people's lives move forward and yours starts to feel to them like it stands still. Thomas and Diane had 2 children, my grandchildren. Daniel, born in 1997. Lily, born in 2001. I met them when they were small. I have a photograph of Daniel at age 4, sitting on my knee at Thanksgiving, both of us looking at something off to the left. I can't remember what now. Someone must have called our names. We are both mid-laugh. I keep that photograph on the table next to my chair. Daniel is 28 years old now. I don't know where he lives. I don't know what he does for work. I don't know if he's married or happy or struggling or well. Lily is 24. I know even less about her. They don't know I exist. Not in any real sense. My name may have come up once or twice when they were children, some distant reference to Grandpa Raymond, far away, not very present. But a name without stories attached to it is just a sound. It means nothing to a child. I let that happen. I have to own that. Patricia called me more than Thomas did for a while. But Patricia had her own life. She moved to Portland in the late 90s, married a kind man named Gerald, and they had 2 children of their own, a boy, Marcus, and a girl, Sophie. Patricia and I spoke on the phone maybe 4 or 5 times a year. She was warm when we talked. She asked how I was feeling. She told me things about the children, small things, ordinary things. Marcus won a spelling bee. Sophie started piano lessons. But I never visited. And after a certain point, she stopped asking me to. I don't blame her. A relationship requires 2 people moving toward each other. I was standing still, telling myself I was giving her space, when the truth was I had simply stopped knowing how to move. Marcus is 22 now. Sophie is 19. I have never met them in person. My own grandchildren. There was a moment, and this is the moment I keep returning to, the one that stays with me like a stone in a shoe. There was a moment about 4 years ago when I was in the hospital for a cardiac procedure. Routine, they said, but when you're 85 and they're putting you under general anesthesia, nothing feels entirely routine. I lay in that hospital bed the night before the procedure, and I thought, if I die tomorrow, who will come? My neighbor Carol would come. She's 63 and brings me soup when the weather turns cold, and she is more family to me than most people who share my blood. My friend Harold from the Veterans Hall would come, though Harold has a bad hip and the drive is 40 minutes. But Thomas, Patricia, the grandchildren, I didn't know. I lay there and I realized, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that I had allowed myself to become a stranger to my own family. Not through any single dramatic event, not through any one fight or wound, but through years and years of small failures. The calls I didn't make, the visits I postponed, the birthdays I acknowledged with a card and a check instead of a phone call and a voice. You can lose people without ever intending to. That's what no one tells you when you're young. You can love someone deeply, privately, quietly, and if you never show it in the language they understand, it disappears. It simply disappears. I called Thomas after I got home from the hospital. He answered on the 3rd ring. There was a wariness in his voice that broke my heart. Not hostility, just distance. The distance of a man who has learned not to expect much from a certain direction. I told him I'd been in the hospital. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I said I was calling because I realized I had been absent in ways I wasn't proud of. I told him I didn't know how to fix it, but I wanted him to know that I thought about him and Diane and the children all the time. He was quiet again, a long quiet. Then he said, "Dad, Daniel doesn't really know who you are." He didn't say it to wound me. He said it the way you state a difficult fact, gently but plainly. Daniel doesn't really know who you are. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. We've spoken a handful of times since then, Thomas and I. It's still careful, still finding its footing. But there's something there now. A door that was locked for years, standing slightly open. Patricia sent me a photograph last Christmas. Marcus and Sophie, standing in front of a decorated tree, grinning. On the back, in Patricia's handwriting, she wrote, "We talk about you sometimes, Dad. There's still time." I wept at that. I'm not ashamed to say it. There's still time. I keep that on my table too, next to the photograph of Daniel. So here is what I want to say to you. You who are younger than me. You who still have the luxury of time that I am no longer sure I have. Relationships do not maintain themselves. The people you love, your parents, your children, your grandchildren one day, they need more than your good intentions. They need your presence, your voice, the small, consistent proof that you are thinking of them, that they are not alone, that they matter to you in ways you are willing to demonstrate. Don't wait for the right moment. Don't tell yourself there will be more time later. Later is not a guarantee. Later is not a right. Later is just a story we tell ourselves to avoid the discomfort of reaching out when it feels hard. Call your grandmother. Drive to see your grandfather. Sit with the old man on the porch, even if the conversation is slow and quiet and you don't know what to say. Because one day, and I promise you this, one day you will sit in a room full of photographs and wonder whether the people in them know how much you love them. And the only way to make sure the answer is yes is to tell them. Now, while there is still time. My name is Raymond Sinclair. I am 89 years old, and I am still learning. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you've been meaning to call, a visit you've been putting off, I hope you'll act on that feeling today. And if you'd like to sit with more stories like this one, stories told slowly and honestly from the end of a long life, I'd be grateful for your company here. There are more memories to share. And I find at this age that sharing them is the closest thing I have left to legacy.